Chapter 1. The Scent of Rain and Fear. The rain wasn't just water, it was tiny, freezing needles, and Lyra Hale felt every single one. She ran. Her lungs burned, screaming for air she couldn't get. Mud sucked at her worn boots. Squelch, pull, squelch. It was a greedy sound, a sound that wanted to keep her, to hold her here until they came. No, no, no. They were close. She could smell their wet coats and the sharp, metallic tang of their weapons. They wanted her blood. They always wanted her blood. Because she was different. Because she wasn't supposed to exist. A life in a cage, that's what they promised. She'd die out here, drowning in the mud, before she let them chain her again. That memory, the smell of bleach and her own sterile terror, pushed her forward. She'd been running for 3 years. Was this where it ended? In the dark, captured by men who saw her as nothing more than a walking, breathing resource? Never. This defiance was the only thing she truly owned. Following that spike of pure, desperate will, a root snagged her ankle. She went down. Hard. Mud filled her mouth. Grit on her teeth. She spat. Scrambled. Her fingernails broke against a slick rock. Get up, get up. The forest was a black, dripping monster. Every shadow held a hand. Every gust of wind whispered her name, Lyra. She burst through a curtain of soaked pine boughs and stopped dead. A line. Carved into the earth. Not by a man, oh no. Deep, jagged gouges in the stone and soil, stark white against the dark mud. Claw marks. Huge claw marks. What in the hells is this? Even as the question formed, shouts echoed behind her. Closer. Too close. She's here. Box her in. The voice was slick, familiar. Dr. Eris. The man who liked to use scalpels. She didn't have a choice, because survival was the only god she prayed to. She launched herself over the strange, scarred boundary. The second her foot hit the other side, the air changed. It didn't just get colder. It got heavy. Thick, like breathing in velvet. A scent hit her, not just pine, but something musky, something animal, and something impossibly safe. A shiver ran down her spine, but this one wasn't from the cold. The sounds of her pursuers, their boots, their shouts, simply stopped. As if they hit a wall. She risked a glance back. They stood at the claw-marked line, panting, their forms blurred by the rain, but they wouldn't cross. They just watched her. That new fear, the fear of the unknown protector, was almost worse. This new place held its own power. She had to keep moving, had to keep breathing, and had to keep fighting. Ahead, through the driving sleet, a single, golden light glowed, a cabin, tucked into the mountain's shadow. Chapter 2. The Moon's Red Haze. Kael Draven knelt on the cold flagstones of his cabin, the circle of silver dust and crushed wolfsbane burning an acrid scent into the air. Tonight was bad. The moon was full. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, but the red haze was still there, painting the inside of his eyelids. It wanted out. The thing inside him, the Lycan madness his father's line called their inheritance, clawed at his ribs. He focused on the pain. The sting of the silver dust on his palms. The bitter taste of the herbs he'd chewed. The groan of the old cabin timbers settling in the wind. Anything but the pull. Control. That was the only word. Numbness was safe. Because feeling anger, joy, and especially desire was the fuel the madness craved. He'd seen what happened when control slipped. He remembered his father's eyes, not gold, but burning red. He remembered the screams. He would not be that. He would be stone. He would be ice. He would be empty. But the storm tonight made it harder. The wind rattled the shutters, a frantic rhythm that matched the panic in his chest. The ritual was supposed to suppress it, to lock the beast in its cage. For generations, his family had used this method. It was a painful, lonely existence. He was an alpha of a pack that couldn't see him, an alpha in self-imposed exile, because he was terrified of what he'd do to them. How much longer can I do this? A growl ripped from his throat, low and ugly. He slammed his silver-dusted palms harder onto the stone. No, he grated. The word was rough, more animal than man. The red haze brightened. He was losing. Just as he thought the fight was over. A scent. He went rigid. Snapped his head up. His eyes, already bleeding from blue to gold, focused on the door. It cut through the wolfsbane. It sliced through the storm. It was wrong. Human. Female. And something else. Something indescribably sweet. Rain-soaked fear. And an underlying trace of, what was that? Lavender and lightning? It didn't fuel the madness. The red haze receded. The burning in his blood quieted. The beast inside him didn't roar. It listened. It tilted its head. Curious. It whined a low, confused sound in the back of his mind. It was the first sound it had made besides a snarl in a decade. No one crossed his boundary. The wards, carved by the first Draven, were blood magic. They kept humans out, period. Because humans were fragile, and his family was not. A thud. Soft. Against his door. He was on his feet in an instant, the movement silent, fluid. A faint moan. The rasp of wet cloth scraping against wood. She was right outside. He shouldn't open it. He should let the storm handle her. Because she was a threat to his control. But she had silenced his beast. Chapter 3. The Storm at the Door. Lyra's last bit of strength gave out on the top step of the cabin. The single, golden light had been her anchor, the only thing she focused on. Now it was just wood. Cold. So cold. Her fingers were numb. She tried to knock, but her hand felt like a heavy, useless stone. It just thumped against the door. Please. The word was a prayer in her mind. She wasn't sure who she was begging. The men behind her? Or the person inside? Please, just let me in. Black spots danced in her vision. The sound of the rain faded to a dull roar. The world was tilting. She slumped against the rough timber, her cheek pressed to the wet wood. It was over. The door screeched open. In that same instant, Kael ripped the door open, braced for a rogue, a hunter, anything but this. A woman. She tumbled inward, a heap of wet wool and soaking black hair. She looked half drowned. But the scent. It hit him like a physical blow. Lavender. Lightning. And her. It wasn't just a scent, it was a call. His beast, the one he'd just fought, rose up. Not in rage. But in recognition. It purred. He grabbed her, his reflexes pure alpha. He hauled her inside, kicking the door shut against the storm with his heel. The sound banged through the small cabin. He intended to interrogate her. He needed to know how she breached his wards. This was a threat. Because if she could get in, they could get in. He held her up by the front of her thin jacket. Who? The word died. His throat closed. Her head lolled back. In the dim firelight, her face was pale, streaked with mud, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Full lips, colored blue with cold. A faint scar cut across her eyebrow. And her scent. It wasn't just near him. It was on him. It wrapped around him. It didn't just quiet his madness, it felt like a cure. Moments later, or maybe hours, she couldn't tell, Lyra woke to two things. One, she was warm. Impossibly, dangerously warm. She was wrapped in something heavy. A blanket that smelled of pine and musk and him. Two, she was being watched. Not by the hunter's cold, assessing eyes. Not by the doctor's cruel, curious gaze. This was different. She blinked, her vision swimming. A man knelt in front of her. No, not a man. He was too big. His shoulders strained the dark shirt he wore. He was all shadow and quiet intensity. And his eyes. Oh, gods, his eyes. They were gold. Not hazel. Not amber. They were pure, liquid gold, and they glowed in the dim room, reflecting the firelight like a predator's. Her breath hitched. Fear, sharp and familiar, spiked through her. She tried to scramble back, but she was tangled in the heavy fur blanket. His voice came, a low rumble that vibrated in her bones, deeper than any human voice should be. You crossed into my land. Chapter 4. Blood on the Threshold. You crossed into my land. Kael's voice was a physical thing, a vibration that Lyra felt in her teeth. His golden eyes weren't just looking at her, they were in her, searching. She flinched, the heavy fur blanket pooling at her waist. She gasped, her throat raw from the cold. I was running. From men. They were. Crash. The cabin door, the one he'd kicked shut, didn't just rattle. It exploded. Wood splintered inward, spraying the room with ice and timber shrapnel. A figure, more beast than man, filled the doorway. It was massive, silhouetted against the raging storm, its eyes burning a sick, feverish yellow. It wasn't one of the hunters. This was something new. Something worse. Rogues, Kael snarled. He didn't shout. He breathed it. He was moving before Lyra could even scream. He became a blur, a shadow detaching itself from the fireplace. He met the creature in the center of the room. The impact shook the floorboards. A second rogue, smaller but faster, slithered through the broken doorway. Its gaze fixed on her. Lyra scrambled backward, crab-walking until her back hit the cold stones of the hearth. The rogue grinned. Its teeth were a broken mess. It smelled like rot and wet fur. "The alpha hides a pet," it hissed, its voice a wet gurgle. "The council will pay well for mine." Kael's roar was not human. It was thundering. It was possession. He threw the first rogue off him, a 900-pound man-beast, like it was a sack of grain. The rogue crashed into a wooden table, shattering it into kindling. But the second one was already on her. Lyra threw her arms up, a useless gesture. A searing, blinding pain erupted in her shoulder. Teeth. Gods, the teeth. They sank deep into her flesh. She screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the storm. In that same instant, the world turned gold. Kael was on the rogue. His hands, which looked like human hands a second ago, were now tipped with black, thick claws. He tore the beast off her and threw it backward through the ruined doorway, where it landed with a sickening crunch. Kael spun back to her. His chest was heaving. Blood, not his, dripped from his chin. His golden eyes were wide, fixed on her shoulder. Black, oily blood, rogue blood, oozed from the bite. "Poison," he choked out. "It's too fast." Lyra's vision was already tunneling. The edges of the room went fuzzy. A coldness, separate from the storm, was spreading from the bite, straight toward her heart. "This is it. I ran from the hunters just to die here." "No." Kael grabbed her. His face was a mask of agony, of conflict. "I can't." He looked at the door. He looked at her. He made a choice. Because he had to. Because she was dying. He lowered his head. "Forgive me," he whispered. Then he bit her. It wasn't like the rogue's attack. This wasn't a tear. This was a claiming. It was a fire that erased the cold. It was a sun exploding in her veins. His fangs sank into the flesh just below her collarbone, and Lyra didn't scream. She arched, a sound ripping from her, half sob, half ecstasy. It felt like her very soul was being rewritten. Kael pulled back. His eyes were wild. He watched, horrified and fascinated, as the black rogue poison was burned away. Her wound, the one he made, sealed itself. It knitted together, leaving behind only a faint, swirling mark on her skin. And for the first time in his adult life, the red madness, the curse that haunted his blood, went utterly, terrifyingly silent. Chapter 5: The Invisible Chain. Lyra woke with a gasp. She was in bed. Not on the floor. The cabin was quiet. The storm still raged outside, but the door had been boarded up with raw planks. The fire crackled, warm and bright. She sat up. Her shoulder, it didn't hurt. She touched the spot where the rogue's fangs had been. Nothing. Just smooth skin. Then her fingers brushed the spot below her collarbone. A pattern. Raised, like a fresh scar, but it didn't hurt at all. It thrummed. Like a plucked string. The memory hit her. The rogue. The poison. His eyes. His teeth. "You," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Kael stood by the window, his back to her. He was impossibly still. "What did you do to me?" He turned. His face was pale. The golden eyes were back to a haunted, human blue. "I saved your life." "You bit me," she screamed, scrambling out of the bed, pulling the fur blanket around her like armor. "You marked me. Like an animal." The word hung in the air, tasting like ash. Because she knew, deep down, that's exactly what he was. What she might be now. "The rogue's venom was killing you," he said, his voice flat. He was trying for that numbness again, but she could see the tremor in his hands. "The alpha's bite is the only antidote. It heals. It claims." "Claims," she repeated, the word a poison in her own mouth. "Just like them. Just like the men in the forest. You all want to own something." She lunged for the door. She didn't care about the storm. She didn't care about the rogues. She would rather face anything than be the property of this monster. She ripped at the new planks. They didn't budge. "Let me out." "I can't." "Let me out." Following that desperate plea, she turned on him, her fists raised. She was going to fight him. A 7-foot-tall wall of muscle. It was suicide. She knew it was suicide. But it was her choice. She took one step toward him, and an invisible chain snapped taut. It wasn't physical. It was inside her. A burning, agonizing pull centered on the mark he'd given her. It yanked her back. It felt like her soul was being ripped from her body. She collapsed, clutching her chest. What is this?" she panted, the pain blinding her. Kael was at her side in an instant, but he didn't touch her. He knelt, his face a mask of self-loathing. It's the bond, he said, his voice rough. You're marked. You're mine. You can't leave. Not without me. The further you get, the more it will hurt. Until it kills you. Consequently, Lyra realized the truth. The hunters had wanted to put her in a cage. This man, this alpha, had just built her a new one. A cage made of her own flesh, tied to him. Because he'd saved her, he had also doomed her. He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a dawning horror she didn't understand. But it's not just you, he whispered, a new, raw fear in his voice. I feel it too. It's quiet. Everything is quiet. He looked at his own hands as if they were alien. Whatever you are, you've silenced my beast. Chapter 6. A Cage of Safety. The silence Kael spoke of was terrifying. For 20 years, his life had been a constant, roaring battle against madness. It was a buzzing in his skull, a heat in his blood, a red film over his vision. Now, there was just peace. A calm, steady center. And it all came from her. From the woman crumpled on his floor, looking at him as if he were the devil. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to explain. But what could he say? He'd saved her life by damning her to his. He'd bound her to a monster to protect her from other monsters. The irony was so bitter it choked him. He had to get her off the floor. You're safe here, he said, his voice sounding hollow. Safe? She laughed, a broken, ugly sound. I'm your prisoner. I am not them, he growled, the alpha tone slipping back in. He recoiled. He was trying to reassure her, but his very nature was a threat. Before he could try again, a sound cut through the storm. A single, mournful howl miles away, but clear as a bell to his ears. It wasn't a rogue. It was his beta. Elias. It was a summons. Kael stiffened. They know, he said, mostly to himself. Lyra's head snapped up. Know what? Know about me. They know my words were breached. He stalked to the window, peering out into the white chaos. The council. My father's old advisors. He spoke the words like they were stones in his mouth. They tolerate my exile because I keep this mountain locked down. Because I keep my madness contained. A human crossing the line, he paused. A human surviving it? They won't understand. They'll see you as a threat. A contamination. This was a new, terrible complication. He was an alpha. His word should be law. However, his pack had seen his control slip before. They watched him, waiting for him to fail, waiting for the madness to take him as it had his father. They saw his isolation not as penance, but as a ticking clock. And now he had a human. A marked human. If they found her, they would kill her. Not just to protect the pack's secrecy, but to cleanse their alpha of what they would see as a sickness. A weakness. You have to hide, he said, turning back to her. Hide? From your people. Lyra pushed herself to her feet, her eyes flashing with a familiar, feral defiance. I'm done hiding. You don't have a choice, he roared. The cabin timbers seemed to groan with him. They're on their way. If they find you, I can't protect you. You mean you won't? I mean I can't. He ran a hand through his dark hair. You don't understand our laws. You are an outsider. Marked without sanction. They will see you as a danger to my sanity, to the pack's stability. And they will remove you. He saw the fight in her, the same desperate survival instinct that had pushed her across his boundary. But she was weak. And she was tied to him. He was her only shield. Because of that, she was also his greatest vulnerability. He grabbed the heavy fur from the bed. You'll stay. You'll be quiet. You won't make a sound. He shoved the fur into her arms. I have to meet them. I have to lie. I have to send them away. He looked at her, his blue eyes pleading. Please. Until I find out why fate wants you here, and why they want you dead, you are safer as my prisoner than you are as their prey. Chapter 7. The Stillness Between Storms. He had lied. Kael returned from the ridge, the scent of wet snow and ozone clinging to him, and Lyra knew. She saw it in the tension of his shoulders, a rigid control that hadn't been there before. He had met his pack, his council, and he had deceived them. For her. A human. A prisoner. That single, unspoken fact shifted the ground beneath her feet. It was a terrifying, unwanted thread of connection. Days began to blur. The storm outside the cabin walls was relentless, a white, howling monster that matched the one she'd seen inside her rescuer. But in their small, firelit space, a strange quiet settled. It was not peace. It was a truce, heavy and fragile. Mornings were silent. He would rise before the sun, his movements fluid and unnervingly quiet for a man his size. Lyra would watch him through her eyelashes, pretending to be asleep. He'd stack firewood. He'd check the planks on the door. He'd stand by the window and just watch the snow. His stillness was a living thing. He was a predator at rest. He was a guardian on his wall. He was a man trapped in his own home. He cooked simple, hearty stews that filled the cabin with the scent of herbs and roasted meat. He would place a bowl on the small table for her. He never spoke. He never ordered her to eat. He just provided. This was the most confusing part. Her entire life, care was a weapon. It was the doctor smiling before the needle. It was the guard offering a blanket before locking the cell. Because kindness was always a down payment on future pain. But Kael, he asked for nothing. He just was. As a result, Lyra's fear began to change. It didn't vanish. It sharpened. It became less about him and more about the situation. She started to see the man. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She saw him trace the silver dust circle on the floor, his expression one of deep, abiding loneliness. This giant, terrifying creature who could tear a rogue apart with his bare hands. He was afraid. He was afraid of himself. One night, she woke up, her heart pounding. Not from a nightmare. From a sound. A voice. His voice. Mine. It wasn't in the room. It was in her head. She sat bolt upright, clutching the fur blanket. He was asleep in his chair by the fire, his head tilted back. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. It was the bond. It was whispering. She stared at him, this man who was her captor and her protector. This monster who had silenced his own beast just by marking her. What are you? She thought the question was a desperate plea. What am I? The bond didn't answer. It just thrummed, a warm, golden thread in her chest, connecting her to the most dangerous and safest thing she had ever known. Chapter 8. Skin Against Skin. You need to know how to fight. The words dropped into the cabin's silence 4 days into their confinement. Lyra looked up from the fire. Kael stood by the newly repaired door, pulling on heavy boots. The storm is breaking. We go outside. I know how to run, she retorted, her voice sharp. Running has worked just fine. It didn't, he said, his tone flat, unarguable. It failed. It brought you here, wounded and dying. Those men in the forest, the hunters, they won't stop. The rogues know this place was breached. You're a target. He finally looked at her, his blue eyes intense. I can't be everywhere at once. I won't let you be helpless. Because he was right, she hated him for it. She hated this weakness. She followed him out. The cold was a slap. The air was sharp, clean, and so bright it hurt her eyes. The snow was waist deep, but he led her to a small clearing he'd already stamped flat. Show me what you know, he commanded. She knew fear. She knew how to twist away. She knew how to make herself small. She did none of those. Fueled by a sudden, defiant rage, she lunged at him. She put all her weight into a punch aimed at his chest. His hand came up. He didn't catch her fist. He enveloped it. His palm was huge, calloused, and impossibly warm. He just held it. Stopped her cold. That is anger, he said, his voice a low rumble. Anger is good. But it's not a weapon. It's fuel. You're wasting it. He let her go. Again. For an hour, they moved. He was a teacher of relentless patience. No, your balance is wrong. Turn your hip. Strike through the target, not at it. He was correcting her stance, his hand brushing her arm. A spark. He showed her how to break a grip, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. A fire. He moved behind her, his chest pressing against her back to guide her shoulders. Breathe from here, he murmured, his hand settling on her waist. Lyra froze. His hand was solid. Heavy. It wasn't the sterile touch of a doctor or the bruising grip of a guard. It was just there. It spanned the space between her hip and ribs, and the mark on her collarbone sang. It blazed with a heat that had nothing to do with fighting. He went rigid too. He must have felt it. The pull. The sudden, suffocating intimacy of the bond flaring between them. His breath hitched. She could feel the sudden, hammering beat of his heart against her back. Time stopped. There was no snow. No clearing. No pack. There was only the scent of pine and musk, the solid wall of his body, and the burning pressure of his palm. He was desire. He was denial. He was trapped in the same moment she was. His hand stayed on her waist. 1 second. 2. A lifetime. It lasted too long. Far, far too long for a lesson. He jerked away as if he'd been burned. He stalked to the other side of the clearing, his back to her, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. That's enough, he bit out. Go inside. Lyra fled, her skin on fire. She didn't know what was more terrifying, the monster that could kill or the man who could want. Chapter 9. The Sins of the Father. Kael left 2 days later. He had to. The patrol to reset his boundary wards was long overdue, and his pack's suspicion was a physical weight he carried. Bolt the door, he'd ordered, his voice rougher than usual. He wouldn't look at her. Not since the training. Don't open it. For anyone. The silence he left behind was worse than the silence they had shared. It was empty. It was cold. Lyra paced the small cabin, the fur blanket wrapped around her. She was a rat in a cage. A warm cage, a safe cage, but still a cage. She hated it. Because she was trapped, her mind started to race. Who is he? Not just the alpha. Not just the man. Kael. What was his story? He had silenced his beast with her. He had lied to his council for her. He was terrified of feeling. Why? She started searching. She didn't know what she was looking for. A weapon? An escape route? Answers? She ran her hands along the rough-hewn walls, under the rickety bed, behind the sparse shelves of food. Nothing. It was a hermit's cabin. Practical. Empty. Then, her foot snagged on a floorboard near the hearth. It was loose. Her heart hammered. This was his space. His private space. The bond flared, a low hum of warning. Or maybe it was guilt. She ignored it. She needed to know. She pried the board up with her fingernails. Beneath it was a small, dark hollow. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thin leather-bound ledger and a stack of files tied with string. Her hands shook. This was it. She pulled them out. The ledger was old, filled with names and dates in a precise, looping script she didn't recognize. She set it aside. She untied the string on the files. The top page was a technical drawing. A diagram of a cage. A diagram of a syringe. Cold. A coldness that had nothing to do with the weather washed over her. She knew that drawing. She knew that handwriting. She flipped the page. A report. Subject 7's blood markers remain anomalous. The hybrid traits are stabilizing, but she shows extreme resistance to conditioning. Lyra's breath stopped. Subject 7. That was her. She frantically tore through the pages. Reports on her capture. Her escape. Speculation on her unique abilities, the very abilities that the hunters had been chasing her for. This was everything. Her whole stolen life. This was the work of Dr. Eris. And on the bottom of the final summary page, in that same precise, looping script, was a signature. A recommendation for immediate retrieval and termination if the subject could not be contained. Lord Draven. She stared at the name. It felt alien. Draven. A sickening, impossible connection clicked into place. Kael Draven. He wasn't just an alpha. He wasn't just her reluctant savior. He was the son of the man who had ordered her experimented on. The son of the man who had stolen her life. The man she was starting to trust, the man whose touch set her on fire, was the heir to her personal hell. The foundation of her fragile trust didn't just crack. It vaporized. Chapter 10. The Ledger of Sins. Lyra waited. The files were on the table. A neat stack of her own personal history, curated by her tormentor. The ledger sat beside it. When she first found them, she had shaken. She had cried. She had dry-heaved into the empty fireplace. But now, hours later, as the light outside began to fade, she felt none of that. In the place of terror, a terrible, cold calm had settled. It was the stillness of a frozen lake, solid and deep. She finally understood. There was no running. There was only fighting. The door creaked. He entered, snow melting from his broad shoulders. Kael looked tired. The harsh lines around his mouth were softer, as if the walk had drained some of his tension. He started to speak. The wards are set. He stopped. His head snapped up. He didn't just see the files. He smelled it. The change in the air. The scent of her fury. Lyra? His voice was cautious. The alpha was gone. This was the man, sensing a trap. He was thorough, she said. Her own voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. It was brittle, sharp. Your father. He kept excellent records. Kael's eyes locked on the papers. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. What did you do? I found your inheritance. She pushed the top file. It slid across the table and stopped at the edge. Project. Hybrid. She let the words hang. Subject. 7. He visibly flinched, as if she had struck him. He took a step, then another. Lyra, I didn't know. You didn't know? She screamed. The icy calm shattered, exploding into 1,000 pieces. You didn't know his name? Lord Draven. The man who signed the orders. The man who wanted me terminated. She grabbed the stack and threw it. Paper scattered, fluttering around him like dead leaves. You live in his shadow. You protect his land. How could you not know? I knew he was ruthless. Kael roared back, his blue eyes flashing, a hint of gold bleeding in. I knew he was a tyrant. I left my pack, I came here, to escape his legacy. To escape the madness his ambition fueled. He grabbed his own head, his fingers digging into his hair. I thought his projects were political. Land. Power. I never knew he was involved in that. In you. So what was this? She advanced on him, jabbing a finger toward the mark on her collarbone. What was I? A coincidence? Or was it penance? Did you save me because you felt guilty? Did you look at me and see a sin? Because she was so close, she saw the exact moment his guilt turned. Her pain, her rage, her accusations, they were too much. They were the very emotions he'd spent a decade suppressing. The bond, that terrible, intimate chain, didn't just send her feelings to him. It sent him back. She felt the spike. The heat. The red haze. Stop, he growled. It was a command. Not for her. For himself. You're just like him, she whispered, her words the cruelest blade she owned. He put me in a cage of steel. You put me in one of flesh and magic. A cage is a cage. That broke him. It wasn't a word. It was a sound. A rip. A primal scream of agony and fury that tore from his throat. The windows rattled. The red haze she'd seen in his eyes when he fought the rogues, it was back. But this time, it was focused on her. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think so. Lyra turned and bolted, ripping the newly planked door open and throwing herself into the freezing, twilight snow. Chapter 11. The Alpha's Choice. He plunged after her. The madness was roaring. It screamed at him. She hurt you. She betrayed you. She is the source of the pain. Silence her. He was losing. The beast his father had embraced was seconds from taking him completely. Lyra, he bellowed. It was meant to be a warning. It sounded like a threat. She stumbled. I looked back. Her face was a white mask of terror. She wasn't seeing him. She was seeing the monster from her files. But they weren't alone. A sharp whistle. A net, threaded with silver, shot from the trees. It hit Kael in the chest. He roared as the metal seared his skin, but he tore through it with one swipe of his claws. It wasn't for him. It was a distraction. 3 figures in white snow gear burst from the tree line. Lyra screamed as one tackled her, a syringe flashing in his hand. He slammed the needle into her leg. Her scream cut off. She went limp. Get the asset. A familiar, slick voice. Dr. Eris. He stood back, a rifle aimed not at Lyra, but at Kael. The Alpha is unstable. Keep him busy. In that terrible, frozen moment, Kael's world snapped into focus. The red haze vanished, burned away by a different, colder fury. The hunters. His father's men. Here. He was about to lunge, to tear Eris limb from limb, when a new scent hit him. Pack. Alpha. A deep voice. Elias. His beta. He stepped into the clearing from the opposite side, flanked by 2 massive, grim-faced wolves in human form. The council. They weren't looking at the hunters. They were looking at Kael. At his claws. At the shredded silver net. Elias, Kael said, help her. Elias looked at Lyra, who was being dragged by the hunters. He looked at Kael. His face was stone. No. The word hit Kael harder than the silver. What? We followed you, Elias said, his voice void of emotion. We felt the ward's breach. We felt the rogue taint. And now this. She is a contamination, Alpha. She brought the humans. She is aggravating your condition. He nodded at the hunters. Let them have her. Let them cleanse this mountain. It is the law. The pack comes first. It was an ultimatum. His pack. His law. His sanity. Versus her. Kael looked at Lyra's still form. He saw her defiance. He saw her find his father's files. He saw her kiss of fire. He looked at Elias, his oldest friend, his face rigid with dogma. He saw his pack's fear. He saw his father's cold, cruel legacy. He saw the tradition that demanded he sacrifice her for their purity. He realized his pack and his father's hunters were just 2 different kinds of cages. Because he finally understood, he made his choice. He turned his back on the hunters. He faced his own beta. The transformation was instant. Not the uncontrolled explosion of madness, but a willed act of power. Bone snapped. My muscles tore and reformed. Black fur erupted. He rose to his full, monstrous height, a 9-foot-tall alpha, perfectly, terrifyingly in control. His eyes were pure, solid gold. He stalked forward, placing his massive, clawed body between his pack and Lyra. He lowered his head and let out a growl that shook the snow from the pines. It was not a sound of madness. It was the sound of kingship. Then he spoke. One word that was both a promise and a declaration of war. She's mine. Chapter 12. The Mark of the Outlaw. The ensuing battle was not a battle. It was a judgment. Kael moved like a black storm. He didn't give the hunters time to aim. He didn't give his pack time to think. He was an alpha protecting his mate, and it was the most terrifying, beautiful thing Lyra had ever seen. She was fading. The drug in her veins made the world swim, but she was awake. She saw Kael toss one of his own pack members, a wolf who tried to grab her, aside with a single, contemptuous swipe. He didn't kill. He dominated. Then he turned on the hunters. He tore the rifle from Dr. Eris's hands and snapped it in two. The other men scattered, firing pistols. The bullets hit his fur and bounced off, flattened. He disabled them with brutal, calculated efficiency. A broken arm. A shattered leg. He was showing them what real power was. Dr. Eris, seeing the tide turn, scrambled backward into the woods and vanished. Kael spun back to his beta. Elias stood alone, his hand on the hilt of a silver knife, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. You chose a human over us, Elias whispered. You are your father's son after all. Mad. Kael shifted back, the fluid, his skin steaming in the cold. He stood naked, bleeding from a silver graze on his arm, but he looked more powerful than he had as a beast. No, Kael said, his voice raw. I'm not. My father saw power as a weapon to control. I see it as a shield to protect. He looked at Lyra. You are relieved of duty, Elias. Go. Tell the council what you saw. Tell them the exile is over. But this mountain? It's hers. He didn't wait for a reply. He scooped Lyra into his arms. He didn't go back to the cabin. It was tainted. He ran. He moved with a speed that blurred the trees, climbing higher into the unforgiving peaks. When she finally awoke fully, she was in a cave. It was dry, ancient. A fire already crackled in a natural hearth. Kael sat across from it, wincing as he wrapped his bleeding forearm. He was bleeding because the hunter's net had been laced with silver. You're an outlaw, she whispered, her voice scratchy. He looked up. The relief in his eyes was so profound it stole her breath. So are you. This realization settled over her. He had done it. He had chosen her. He had fought his pack, his law, and her hunters. He had saved her. They'll hunt us, she said. All of them. Your pack. My creators. Yes, he said, and the word was heavy. Us. That one word. Us. It changed everything. The anger, the betrayal she'd felt in the cabin, it felt a lifetime away. That was about the past. This was the present. She saw the man, stripped of his title, his land, his burden. He was just Kael. Wounded. Powerful. And, for the first time, free. She got to her feet. Her legs were shaky, but she walked to him. He tensed, watching her, expecting more rage. Lyra didn't wait. She didn't ask. She sank to her knees in front of him, put her hands on his face, and she kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a raw, desperate collision. It was gratitude and fury and fear and a fierce, possessive need all crashing together. It was a sealing of their new reality. He groaned, his hands coming up to tangle in her hair. He kissed her back with a decade of pent-up starvation. And the mark on her collarbone ignited. It wasn't a thrum. It was a nova. A searing, white-hot fire that burned away her fear, his control, and everything else in the world. The accidental bond was now a deliberate chain, and she was holding his end just as tightly as he held hers. Chapter 13. The Mountain's Heart. Kael was dying. The silver graze on his arm, the one he'd taken protecting her, was not a clean wound. It was black. It sizzled. A foul, coppery smell rose from his flesh. He stumbled, his massive weight leaning on Lyra. She was his only support. Here, he grunted, his voice tight with agony. We have to be close. He was weaker than she had ever seen him. The choice he'd made on the ridge, choosing her over his pack, had cost him his allies. The fight had cost him his strength. Because he was poisoned, the madness he'd held back for so long was surging, using the silver as a gateway. His blue eyes flashed a dangerous, hazy red. Following his gesture, she saw it. A wall of rock covered in ancient, frozen ivy. It looked solid. "Kael, there's nothing here." "Push," he commanded, collapsing against the rock face. Lyra shoved her hands against the stone. It didn't budge. "It won't." "No." He reached up, his trembling hand finding a carved groove hidden beneath the ice. A Draven must open it. He pressed his bloody palm to the stone. With a groan that shook the snow from the trees, the rock wall slid sideways. It revealed a dark, square opening. A passage. An ancient, sharp scent of dust and ozone rolled out, a smell so old it felt sacred. This was his hidden sanctuary. The old mountain temple. He practically fell inside, dragging her with him. He collapsed onto the stone floor, his breathing ragged. The red haze in his eyes was brighter now. "The silver," he choked out. "It's feeding the curse. The moon rot. Get away from me." "Lyra, run." But she didn't run. She looked at this man who had declared war on his entire world for her. She looked at the black poison creeping up his arm. She looked at the madness trying to claim his mind. She had been running her whole life. She was done. "No," she said, her voice echoing in the vast, dark chamber. She knelt beside him. He flinched, trying to scramble away. "I'll hurt you." "The beast. You chose me," she whispered, her hands shaking. "Now I'm choosing you." Because she had no other choice, she did the only thing she could. She laid her hands on the festering, silver-laced wound. The moment her skin touched his, the mark on her collarbone erupted. It wasn't pain. It was power. A brilliant, clean, white light flooded from her palms. It wasn't hot. It was a pure, cleansing fire. Kael screamed. It was not a roar of madness. It was a shout of sheer, agonizing release. Lyra watched, her eyes wide, as the black, poisoned blood retreated. It dissolved under her touch. The sizzle stopped. The angry red flesh knitted itself back together. The red haze in Kael's eyes flickered, fought, and then vanished. He was left panting, his eyes a clear, shocked blue. He stared at his arm. It was whole. The curse, the moon wrought, was silent. Not just suppressed. It was gone. He looked at her, his expression one of raw, terrifying awe. What are you?" She had been Subject 7. She had been a runner. She had been a prisoner. Now, she finally knew. "I'm the cure," she breathed. That realization changed everything. The bond between them, forged in violence and fear, now flared with a different, deeper magic. It was not just a chain. It was a conduit. He saw her, really saw her, not as a human, but as his miracle. She saw him, not as a monster or an alpha, but as hers. He surged forward, his mouth capturing hers. This kiss was not the desperate, frantic collision on the mountain. This was reverence. This was certainty. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her down. Lyra. Her name on his lips was a prayer. They came together on the cold temple floor. It was not a surrender. It was a seal. It was the final, irrevocable click of a lock that bound their souls. They were two broken halves, two outlaws, two exiles. And in the heart of the ancient mountain, they finally became one. Chapter 14. The Cost of Miracles. For 3 days, they knew peace. The temple was a true sanctuary, hidden from the world, silent and safe. They were not Alpha and prisoners. They were just Kael and Lyra. The bond between them was a steady, warm hum, a constant, silent conversation. He explored her mind and body with a tenderness that healed wounds she didn't even know she had. In turn, she explored the temple. The walls were covered in ancient carvings. Stories. Her stories. Kael, look. She traced a carving on the main chamber wall. It showed a figure of light, a woman, her hands outstretched. Before she knelt a wolf, a shadow of madness left its body. It's us. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He pressed his lips to her mark. It's us, he agreed, his voice a low rumble. You healed me. You saved me. He felt whole. The constant rage, the red haze, the fear he'd lived with his entire life, it was just gone. He felt light. He felt human. Just as he said it, he saw the next panel in the carving. Lyra hadn't seen it yet. It was hidden in the shadows. It showed the same woman of light, now glowing brighter. But the wolf at her feet, it was fading. It was becoming transparent. It was dying. A cold dread, sharper than any rogue's claw, pierced Kael's heart. What does this mean? Kael. Lyra turned in his arms. What is it? You're pale. He was about to speak when he was hit by a pain so profound, so absolute, that his knees buckled. It was not the moon rot. It was not madness. It was emptiness. A hollow, agonizing cold that started in his chest and spread to his limbs. He doubled over, gasping. Kael, she shrieked, catching him. At the same time, Lyra felt a new presence. Outside the temple. Far down the mountain. It was a cold, slithering sensation, like spiders on her brain. Not wolves. Not hunters. They found us, she whispered, her blood turning to ice. She ran to the temple's hidden overlook. Far below, at the tree line, a new group had gathered. They wore dark robes. They moved like shadows. Witches. And standing with them, pointing up the mountain, was the unmistakable, slick form of Dr. Eris. The hunters and the witches, they had united. She's here. Eris's voice was too faint to hear, but she felt the words. The energy spike. She used her power. She's activated. Kael was at her side in an instant, the pain masked by raw alpha fury. I will never let them touch you, he vowed. He was fully committed. He would burn the world down for her. He stepped onto the precipice, ready to shift, ready to roar his challenge. He couldn't. He screamed. The sound was thin, human. He clutched his chest. The pain was back. His curse, the moon rot, did surge, but it was weak. It was dying. Lyra stared at him. She stared at her own hands, the hands that had healed him. She looked back at the carving, the bright woman, the fading wolf. Oh gods. No. The horrible, devastating truth slammed into her. Her hybrid power was not a cure. It was a parasite. It wasn't silencing his curse. It was consuming it. And, because Kael's life force and his alpha power were fundamentally bound to the curse, her miracle was eating him alive. Chapter 15. The Kindest Betrayal. Kael felt it. The abyss. The hollowing out. She was his cure, and she was his poison. Every moment she was near him, her power, her very presence, siphoned him. The curse was dying, and, because it was part of him, he was dying with it. He loved her. Therefore, he had to leave her. But he couldn't just leave. The witches and hunters were at the base of the mountain. If he died, if he weakened completely, they would take her. They would tear her apart to find the power that was killing him. He had only one choice. It was the hardest one he'd ever made. He turned to Lyra, his face a mask of stone. He had to rebuild his walls. He had to be the alpha. He had to be the monster, just one last time. They are climbing, he said, his voice cold, distant. We have to hide. Deeper. There is a place. Lyra, still reeling from her discovery, just nodded. She trusted him. She would follow him into the dark. He led her through the back of the temple, into tunnels carved by his ancestors. The air grew cold. This, consequently, was his greatest fear come to life. He'd sought isolation to protect his pack from his madness. Now he had to seek isolation to protect her from his love. They arrived in a small, circular chamber. It was ancient. It smelled of dust and sealed air. Wait here, he said, his voice rough. I will draw them off. Lead them east. No. Lyra grabbed his arm. Kael, I'm killing you. I can feel it. We have to. You will wait, he commanded, his alpha tone making her flinch. She stepped back, hurt and confused. Kael. She stepped fully into the chamber. The instant her foot cleared the threshold, Kael slammed his palm against a rune on the wall. A sound like a mountain sigh filled the air. A massive, circular stone door, hidden in the wall, ground shut. It was sealed with a thud that shook her bones. Magic, blue and ancient, flared across its surface, sealing the cracks. She was trapped. She threw herself against the stone. Kael. Kael, no. Don't do this. His voice came from the other side. It was no longer the voice of an alpha. It was the voice of a man, broken and dying. It's the only way. You're safe there. The stone is warded. They can't smell you. They can't sense your power. The temple will hide you. You're sacrificing yourself, she screamed, her fists bloodying against the rock. You'll die out there. You're already weak. I am, he whispered. His voice was thick with a pain that had nothing to do with his life force. It was his heart. My madness is returning because I'm weak. I can't fight it and them. I would rather die as a man protecting you than live long enough to become the monster that hurts you. She heard him step back. Kael. Please. Don't leave me. She heard his footsteps, heavy and slow, walking away. The separation was a physical tear. The bond screamed, a high-pitched keen of agony in her soul. She could feel him, his weakness, his despair, his love. Lyra slid to the floor, her body racked with sobs. He was gone. But then, the sobs stopped. She wiped her face. He was wrong. She was not the same girl who ran from the hunters. She was not Subject 7. She was not a victim to be hidden. She rose to her feet, her eyes hard. He was her home. He was her pack. She ran from monsters her whole life. Now, she would run to one. "I'm not letting you die, Kael," she whispered to the unmoving stone. She turned. The chamber wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. Ancient weapons hung on the walls. Tapestries depicted battles between alphas and witches. This was not a tomb. It was a war room. And she was going to find a way out. Chapter 16. The Traitor's Gambit. Kael was running on fumes. Each step was a fire in his joints. The hollowing out feeling was worse now, a giant, cold scoop taken from his gut. He was weak. Because he was weak, the madness, the true moon rot, was scraping at the edges of his mind. It was a red, buzzing thing that whispered, "You are dying. You failed." He led the hunters and witches on a false trail, east along the high ridge. But they were smart. They were fanning out. He stumbled, his knee hitting a sharp rock. The pain was distant. He could smell them. The ozone of the witch's magic. The sterile, metallic scent of the hunter's weapons. And something else. Something familiar. Pack. Alpha. Kael's head snapped up. Elias. His beta stood 10 yards away, flanked by 2 other council enforcers, Kael's oldest packmates. Relief, so potent it almost made him weep, flooded Kael's system. "Elias. Thank the moon. You have to. You look unwell," Alpha Elias said. His voice was cold. There was no relief in his eyes. Only judgment. "It's Lyra," Kael panted, forcing himself to his feet. "She's hidden. Safe. The hunters." "She has infected you," Elias interrupted. He took a step forward. The enforcers fanned out. "We felt the shift. We felt your power drain. You have compromised this pack. You have broken your exile." Kael stared. "Elias, no. She is the cure. She is a human," Elias spat. "A hybrid abomination. And she has made you weak." He nodded. "Your eyes. The madness is back." It was true. Kael could feel it. The red haze was tinting his vision because his body was too frail to fight it. He was a king with no army. "You don't understand," Kael pleaded. She is bait." The enforcers moved. Kael tried to shift. He couldn't. The power wasn't there. It was just gone. He tried to fight as a man. He was strong, but he was sick. There were 3, and they were prepared. A silver chain, heavy and cold, wrapped around his chest, his arms. He roared as it burned, but the roar was thin. It was pathetic. Elias watched, his face carved from stone, as Kael was forced to his knees. "I warned you, Kael. I told you the pack comes first. You betrayed me," Kael choked, the silver eating at his skin, at his remaining strength. "I saved the pack," Elias corrected. "I made a deal. I led them all here. The witches. The hunters. Your father's old pets." He knelt, his face inches from Kael's. "They all want the same thing. They want the hybrid. And we want our pack back." Dr. Eris stepped from the trees. He was smiling. "Excellent work, Beta." Kael lunged, a useless, desperate movement that only tightened the chains. "Where is she? Where is she?" Elias stood. He looked down at the captured, chained Alpha. At the man who had been his best friend. "The witches have a new toy. A way to call her. She feels what you feel, yes? The bond?" He gestured to the chains. "They are going to pull her here, using your pain. And when she comes, you have one choice." Elias tossed a silver dagger. It landed in the snow at Kael's knees. "End the curse, Alpha. Sever the bond. Kill her. Or she dies, and you die with her." Chapter 17. The White Flag. The silence in the war room was a tomb. Lyra felt the bond, that golden thread, snap taut. It wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. Kael's pain flooded her. It was sharp, burning. Silver. It was cold despair. Betrayal. She felt his capture as if it were her own hands being bound. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She had to get out. She ran from the tapestries, her eyes scanning every inch of the stone. He had locked her in to protect her. But he was the one who needed saving. There. A crack. Behind a weapons rack. It was small, a fissure in the rock, barely wide enough for her arm. A faint, cold draft smelled of the outside. She threw the ancient, rusted swords aside. She clawed at the stone. Her fingernails broke. She didn't care. She found a loose rock. Pulled. Another. She worked like a madwoman, her fear giving her a strength she didn't know she had. The rock wall crumbled, revealing a narrow, dark chute. A passage. She didn't hesitate. She plunged into the darkness, crawling on her hands and knees. The tunnel was tight, suffocating. It scraped her back. It cut her knees. But she could feel Kael. He was her beacon. His pain was her map. She burst out onto a lower ledge, gasping, covered in dirt. The wind hit her, sharp and cold. And she saw them. The entire mountain slope was a theater of war. Kael was in the center. He was on his knees, bound in silver chains that sizzled, sending up a foul smoke. His head was bowed. He looked broken. Elias stood over him, a king holding court. The council enforcers were a stone wall. And opposite them, the witches in their dark robes, and Dr. Eris, his face lit with triumph. "She will come," Elias was saying. "The bond is too strong. She will not let him suffer. And when she does," a witch hissed, her voice like dry leaves, "we will take the power from her. And you will get your alpha back. Cured. And empty." Lyra's blood ran cold. Cured. And empty. They didn't understand. She wasn't just draining his curse. She was draining him. They would kill her, and he would still die. But wait. If she died, would the bond break? Would her power, the power draining him, return to her? And if it left him, would his own power, the alpha strength, rush back in? She saw Kael. He was struggling, trying to rise. He was too weak. The madness was in his eyes, a faint red flicker. He was losing himself. Because she loved him, she knew what to do. She had to die, so that he could live. She stepped out from the rocks. Her voice, small but clear, cut across the armed standoff. "Stop." Every head snapped toward her. Kael's head jerked up. His eyes, blue and gold and red, widened in horror. "Lyra. No. Run." She walked forward, her hands raised. A white flag. She didn't look at Elias. She didn't look at Kael. She looked straight at Dr. Eris. "It's me you want. Let him go." Dr. Eris's smile was a horrible thing. Subject 7. "You've come home. Let him go," she repeated. "I'll give you whatever you want. The power. My blood. Anything. Just let him live." The head witch glided forward. "A foolish girl. You think you can bargain?" "I'm not bargaining," Lyra said, her voice shaking, but her eyes steady. "I'm surrendering." She saw Kael throw himself against the chains. He roared, a sound of pure agony. "Don't touch her." The witch just smiled. She raised her hand. "Take her." Chapter 18, The Unbound Beast. Kael watched them take her. He watched the witches form a circle around Lyra. He watched Dr. Eris pull out a silver-tipped syringe. He felt it all. Her terror. Her resolve. Her acceptance. She was doing this for him. She was going to die. The bond, that warm, golden thing that had saved his soul, began to fray. He felt her life force pull. The witches were starting. They were drawing her power out. They were killing her. And Kael snapped. It was not a thought. It was not a choice. It was shattering. His worst fear, losing her, had come true. The grief and the rage were a tidal wave. It didn't just feed the madness. It obliterated it. It consumed his fear. It consumed his control. It consumed Kael. The silver chains exploded outward. Not melted. Shattered. Elias turned. "What?" He never finished. The thing that rose from the snow was not Kael Draven. It was not their alpha. It was 9 feet of black fur, twisted muscle, and pure, unrelenting night. Its claws were a foot long. Its fangs were daggers. And its eyes, they were not gold. They were not blue. They were twin pools of burning, absolute red. This was not the moonrot. This was something older. Something worse. This was the primal beast he had fought his entire life. And it was finally, horribly, unbound. It didn't roar. It unleashed a sound of pure desolation that shook the mountain. It moved. It was on the council enforcers before they could even shift. It was a blur of black death. It didn't hurt. It ended. Elias raised his silver knife. The beast caught his wrist. The sound of bones crunching echoed in the sudden, terrible silence. The witches broke their circle. Dr. Eris fired his pistol. The beast didn't even flinch. It turned its massive head. It saw the hunters. It saw the witches. It saw enemies. Everywhere. Kill it! Eris shrieked. The beast descended. It was a whirlwind of claws and teeth. It tore through hunters and witches alike. It was a force of nature. A hurricane. An earthquake. It was the mountain's own rage given form. Kael's worst fear was realized. He had become a monster. He was destroying everything. His pack. His enemies. Everything. He was his father's son, magnified. He threw a witch against a rock. He tore a hunter's rifle in two. The snow was stained red. Survivors were scattering, screaming. Then it stopped. It stood in the center of the carnage, panting, its black fur matted with blood. It had killed them all. No, not all. It turned. Its red eyes, devoid of reason, of memory, of love, settled on the last living thing. Lyra. She was huddled by a rock, the witch's ritual incomplete. She was the only thing left. The source of the pain. The trigger. The final threat. It began to stalk toward her. Low. Slow. A predator closing in. This was it. The end. Lyra got to her feet. She was shaking. She was crying. But she stood. She looked at the monster that had been Kael. Her voice, impossibly fragile, cut through the wind and the blood. If you're going to destroy everything, start with me. Chapter 19. The Man in the Monster. The beast stared. Its red gaze was fixed on her, this small, fragile thing that did not run. Start with me. The words were insane. Prey did not invite the predator. The red haze that painted his vision, the one that screamed kill, end, destroy, it flickered. Like a dying flame. It stuttered. The scent of her, lavender and lightning and Lyra, cut through the metallic tang of blood. Inside that inferno, Kael was a whisper. He was chained, drowning in his own power. He was the unbound thing. He was his father's worst nightmare. He had destroyed his own pack. He was about to destroy the only thing he had ever truly loved. But she spoke. He heard her. Not as a sound. He felt it as a light. A single, tiny pinprick in the crimson void. He wasn't Kael. He did it. But he heard her. This simple fact was the only weapon he had left. He was a ghost in his own body, but he reached for that sound. He grabbed it with both hands. He pulled. The beast roared. It was a new sound. It was not a sound of rage. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It clawed at its own head, black talons scraping its own fur. It staggered back from her, its massive body shuddering. No, a voice grated. It was not the beast's growl. It was not Kael's voice. It was something horrible, caught between. Lyra watched, her heart a frozen bird in her chest. The monster was fighting itself. It fell to its knees. The snow hissed. Bone snapped. Crack, pop, grind. It was the sound of his first transformation, but twisted, wrong. It was a war being fought in flesh and sinew. Black fur receded, steaming in the cold, revealing blood-soaked skin. Claws shortened, shrinking into blunt, human fingers. The massive, fanged skull seemed to implode, crushing itself back into the features of the man she loved. Moments later, he was just Kael. He was naked, kneeling in a circle of red snow. He was covered in the blood of his pack. His enemies. He looked at his hands. Human hands. Sticky. Red. He had done this. He had fought repression his whole life, and the moment he finally felt, truly, deeply felt, he had become a genocide. He looked up. His eyes were blue. Haunted. Shattered. But they were his. Lyra? His voice was a raw scrape. He looked past her at the bodies. At Elias, crushed and unmoving. At the witches. At his own men. I did this? Because she was his only anchor in that ocean of death, she took one, trembling step toward him. She didn't have an answer. The monster was gone. But the man who remained was, perhaps, even more broken. The silence on the mountain was absolute, broken only by the cold wind. But then, a groan. A wet, agonizing sound from the rocks. Not everyone was dead. Chapter 20. The Bleeding Curse. That single sound shattered the fragile, horrific moment. Kael tried to stand. His legs buckled. Kael. Lyra rushed to him, grabbing his arm. It was freezing. He collapsed against her, his weight almost taking her down. He gasped. I'm empty. The power he'd used, the unbound primal rage, had burned out the very last of his reserves. The hollowing sensation was back, 1,000 times worse. He was dying. Fast. Lyra, he panted, his face pale. It's still happening. This was the truth. Her power was still draining him, even after the fight. The monster had been a temporary, final surge. Now, the real problem, the parasitic nature of her cure, was finishing the job. Because he had no curse left to feed it, her power was now just feeding on him. He killed them all. The voice was a wet gurgle. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound. Elias. He was alive. Pinned under a rock, his body twisted, but his eyes were wide. He was staring at Kael with pure, unadulterated horror. Monster, he choked. Not an alpha, a demon. A demon. He's right, you know. A third voice. Slick. Unharmed. Dr. Eris. He stepped out from behind a stand of pines, his white snowsuit stained with someone else's blood. He held a small, silver canister. Incredible, he said, his voice conversational. Absolutely primal. You've surpassed your father's legacy, Kael. A true weapon. But now he grinned. You're spent. Lyra spun, placing her trembling body between Eris and Kael. Stay away from him. Oh, I don't want him, Eris said, walking closer. He's a failed experiment. A byproduct. A dead end. I want you, Subject 7. You are the source. You are the power. You are the one who unleashed that. He gestured to Kael. And he, Eris said, is dying. Because you're near him. Am I wrong? Lyra froze. He knew. He had seen it. What do we do? Her mind was screaming. Kael, leaning on her, his breathing shallow, looked at the carnage he had wrought. He saw the man who hated him, Eris. He saw the pack brother who now feared him, Elias. He saw the woman who loved him. He needed a plan. He needed strength. He needed time. He had none of them. The temple, he rasped, his voice barely audible. The carving. The woman, she was giving the power, Lyra. Not taking it. You're not a parasite. You're a vessel. It's unbalanced. You're draining the curse. But the curse is me. We have to. It's too late for rituals, Kael, Eris sneered. He was 20 yards away. He raised the silver canister. This is a concentrated silver aerosol. A lovely invention. It will kill your beast, your curse, and your heart in about 30 seconds. Then, the girl comes with me. They were trapped. Kael was dying. Eris had the weapon. And from the rocks, Elias was watching, his eyes filled with a terrifying, righteous hatred. Chapter 21. The Last Stand. This was the end of the line. There was no mountain to climb. There was no sanctuary to find. The fight was here, in this graveyard of snow and blood. Kael struggled to his feet. Lyra held him up. They were two halves of a whole, and both halves were shattered. I won't let him take you, Kael breathed. His words were just air. He had no strength. He was a dead man walking. I know, Lyra said. She wasn't just holding him. She was willing to stand him. She could feel his life, a tiny, guttering flame, through the bond. He looked at her, his blue eyes, so clear, so human, already clouding over. I ran my whole life, he whispered, his voice catching. From my father. From my curse. From myself. And I ran right into you. I'm so sorry, Lyra. I'm not, she said, her own tears freezing on her face. I'm not running anymore, Kael. Whatever happens. It happens to us. How touching. Eris mocked. He advanced, closing the distance. It's a genuine shame she's killing you. A fatal design flaw in the hybrid power. But that's what experiments are for. To find the bugs. He was 10 yards away. He raised the canister. Goodbye, Lord Draven. Because he had no other choice, Kael used the last atom of his strength. He shoved Lyra. He tried to put himself between her and the canister. Lyra. Run. But she didn't run. She stumbled, and she saw it. The twist. Elias. The broken beta. He wasn't just watching. He was moving. He had his silver knife. He was crawling, dragging his shattered legs through the snow. He wasn't crawling for Eris. He was crawling for Kael. He must die. Elias shrieked, his voice broken and wet. The demon, it must be purged. It was a nightmare. Eris was about to press the nozzle. Elias was lunging with the knife. Kael was a human shield, waiting for the killing blow. Lyra was trapped between them. She smelled the sharp, chemical tang of the silver aerosol. She saw the glint of the dying sun on the silver knife. She felt Kael's fading heartbeat through the bond. He was going. This was the moment. The ultimate test. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a cure. She was a weapon. If fate made us, Kael whispered, bracing for the end, then fate can damn itself. No, Lyra said. She didn't run from Kael. She ran to him. She threw her arms around him from behind, her body flush against his back. She faced Eris. She faced Elias. She faced everything. She screamed. And she poured her power. Not out. Into him. She took all of her light, all of her hybrid energy, all of her soul, and she shoved it into the dying ember of his. Chapter 22. The Soul's Nova. No! Lyra screamed. She threw her arms around Kael, her back to the two approaching deaths. Eris's finger tightened on the canister. Elias raised the silver knife, his face a mask of righteous hate, ready to plunge it into Kael's back. I won't let you, she whispered. She wasn't just holding him. She was shielding him. She felt his last, failing heartbeat. She felt the bond, that agonizing thread, about to snap. This was the moment. She had been a vessel for a power that drained. She had been a cure that killed. But what if? What if the carving was right? What if it wasn't meant to take? She pushed. She took every last drop of her light, her hybrid energy, her terror, her love, and she shoved it all into Kael. She poured her soul into his. It was not a transfer. It was a fusion. The bond between them, that chain of flesh, became a gateway of pure, blinding light. In that same instant, Eris pressed the nozzle. A cloud of silver mist shot forward. Elias lunged, the knife aimed for Kael's heart. A nova of white, cleansing fire erupted from Lyra's back. It hit the silver aerosol. The mist didn't just evaporate, it incinerated. The chemical cloud detonated, a concussive blast that threw Dr. Eris backward, his silver canister melting, his screams swallowed by the light. The white fire struck Elias's knife. The silver, anathema to werewolves, dissolved into steaming slag. It never touched Kael's skin. Elias cried out, his hand burning, as he stared at the hilt of a weapon that no longer existed. The light was not a weapon. It was a judgment. It was a purifying fire. It consumed Kael. But it wasn't burning him. It was burning the curse. Lyra felt it, a black, ancient, oily thing being ripped from his bloodline. The generational moon rot, the madness of his father, was being erased from existence. Simultaneously, the fire consumed her. It burned away the parasite. The part of her power that needed to feed, that needed to drain, it was scoured away, leaving something clean. Something hers. The entire mountaintop was engulfed in a silent, white column of impossible energy. Kael and Lyra were at its center, two figures locked in an embrace. He could feel her. Her memories. Her fear. Her strength. She could feel him. His loneliness. His burden. His relief. The light compressed. It folded in on itself. It consumed the bloodstains on the snow. It purified the air. Dr. Eris was gone. Elias was a silent, unmoving shape. The mountain was finally, truly silent. Kael stood, holding her. He was whole. She was whole. He lowered his head, his lips brushing her ear, as the last of the light faded into their skin. Mine, he whispered. And the world went white. Chapter 23. The Color of Silence. Lyra woke to the sound of birds. Not wind. Not screams. Birds. The light was soft, filtering through the temple's high opening. Sunday. How long had she been asleep? She sat up. Her body ached, a deep, muscle-sore protest. But she felt light. The constant, humming pull of the bond was gone. It wasn't a chain anymore. It was just her. Like her own skin. She was clean. Someone had washed the blood and grime away. She was wrapped in furs. You're awake. Her head snapped toward the temple entrance. Kael. He was sitting there, his back against the stone, staring out at the forest. He looked different. He wore simple leather pants. His shoulders were relaxed. He wasn't the coiled spring of rage and control she'd always known. Kael. Her voice was a croak. He stood and turned. And her breath caught in her throat. His eyes. They were not the burning red of the monster. They were not the molten gold of the alpha. They were blue. A clear, calm, human blue. The color of a mountain lake. The color of peace. He smiled. A slow, hesitant expression that transformed his harsh features. He looked younger. He looked free. She whispered, her hand going to her own chest. Your eyes. The curse. It's gone, he said. His voice was different. The low, guttural rumble was gone. It was just a man's voice. Deep. Warm. Not suppressed. Not caged. Gone. It didn't just save us. It ended it. He walked to her, knelt. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The light. It burned the rot from my blood. It shattered the curse my family carried. And me, she asked, her voice trembling. Am I still? You're still you, he said, taking her hand. He kissed her palm. Your power. It's stable. It's just yours. It's not a parasite. It doesn't need to feed. He touched the faint, silvery mark on her collarbone. It's just a scar. A memory. She stared at him. The man she had met in the storm. The monster who had marked her. The alpha who had chosen her. And now this? Just Kael. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. She wept. Not for fear. Not for pain. For joy. He held her, his arms strong and steady, and for the first time in her life, she was completely, utterly safe. Days later, they stood on the mountain. The snow was melting, revealing the first green shoots of spring. The bodies were gone. The mountain was clean. The cabin was a ruin. A pile of charred, splintered wood. A monument to the storm they had survived. Kael looked at the wreckage. Then he bent, picking up a solid, unburned timber from the pile. He tested its weight. We should rebuild, he said, his voice quiet. Lyra looked at the ruin, then at him. She nodded, bending to pick up a smaller, sturdy piece. Yes, she said. We should. Chapter 24, The Home We Built. The forest was loud. Spring had exploded across the mountain. The air was thick with the scent of pine sap and damp earth. The cabin was new. It was made of the same dark timber, but the windows were larger. It was not a fortress. It was a home. In the clearing, Lyra stood with her back to the sun. She was not alone. No, Rin, she said, her voice gentle. You're footing. You're leaning too far back. Balance comes from your center. From here. She tapped her own chest. A young wolf girl, maybe 10 years old, huffed and righted herself. She was clumsy, her limbs still new to her shifter skin. Beside her, 2 other children, a quiet boy who looked human but smelled of ozone, and another young wolf, copied the stance. Lyra smiled. Again. She was teaching them. Runaways. Hybrids. Lost children who had nowhere else to go. She was teaching them self-defense. She was giving them the one thing no one had ever given her, a choice. From the porch of the new cabin, Kael watched. He was splitting firewood. The thwack of the axe was a steady, peaceful rhythm. His arms were corded with muscle, but the dangerous, oppressive weight of the alpha was gone. He was just a man. A protector. His blue eyes, clear and warm, never strayed long from Lyra. Later, as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Lyra came to join him. The children were inside, asleep. She leaned back against his chest, and his arms wrapped around her waist. They stood in the quiet, a familiar, comfortable silence. It's peaceful, he murmured, his breath warm on her hair. Lyra sighed, her body melting into his. I ran from monsters my whole life, she whispered, her voice so soft he almost missed it. I ran, and I found the only one who ever made me feel safe. He smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. He traced the silvery mark on her collarbone, a faint, beautiful swirl against her skin. It was not a brand of ownership. It was the scar of their survival. You met the alpha by mistake, he said, his voice low. Lyra turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. She looked into his calm, blue eyes. Fate doesn't make mistakes, she answered. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not a kiss of desperation. It was not a kiss of fire. It was a kiss of promise. Of belonging. They were not cursed. They were not hunted. They were just rooted. They were home.